Well, some Canadians think that religion is helpful for the country, but there are others who would disagree. But how many of us believe that religion is something that's actually important to Canada's economy? Well, today's guest says that that is exactly the case. I'm joined by Dr. Brian Grimm. He holds a doctorate in quantitative sociology and is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between religious freedom and the economy, and is also the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy: How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. That is a mouthful. Dr. Brian Grimm, thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
So can you first of all tell us a bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, so we're a private foundation, public foundation, non-religious foundation that helps businesses see that religious freedom for everyone, including people that don't have a religion, is good for economies and good for business, and then helps businesses uh, promote a more diverse, religiously diverse and inclusive workforce for their own companies. So we both produce studies, but also work with companies directly to help them become more religiously uh, friendly or religiously inclusive, however you might like to phrase it.
Now, your study estimates the economic value of religion to Canadian society at about $30 billion annually. And I think the mid-range was estimated at around 67 billion, and the high-end estimate puts it at an astounding $690 billion. So can you explain how you go about finding that out, and what do those numbers even mean?
Yeah, well, the high number is just one that takes into account the sort of spending power of religiously affiliated Canadians. So that's just a reference number. That's what their household income is. The households of families that are religious have that much spending power. So that's not really the one we focus on. The middle range is the one that we do focus on, just to put that in context, that would the religious economy of Canada would make it a larger economy than 110 countries in the world. So it would be like the 72nd largest economy in the world if you think of national GDP. So that's no small number. The way we go about it is looking first at the receipts and the amount of money coming into congregations of all sorts, Christian, Muslims, Jewish, all the different faith congregations, and then look at how they spend that money. So if you think about that, that's money. People usually think that's money coming in, they spend on themselves, but it's actually fueling economies because you pay salaries, either it's clergy or groundskeepers. You pay, especially in Canada, for snow removal, from parking lots. They pay for lights, heating, electricity. But more than that, then we look at what is the value of what they do for society. So more than faith congregations are more than just organizations that tend to their own flocks, but they provide daycare, they provide services for people with addiction, they provide community gathering places, and all of that has economic value. So we calculate that up. We also look at faith institutions like hospitals, universities, as well as faith related businesses. And that comes to that total.
It's interesting that you say business, because when you first were explaining it, it sounds almost like a business model. But, then again, you get into how they help people. So there are some who might say that while religious organizations provide help for less fortunate, it doesn't actually translate into real dollars for the economy. But where do you see direct benefits to the economy? You mentioned
Well,
educational.
yeah. So, I mean, one is the direct spending. It's just money coming in and going out. That money doesn't just come into a collection plate and stay there and bury it under a mattress. It gets spent on community service and various program salaries, like I mentioned. The other is that some of the programs, like Alcoholics Anonymous, if there wouldn't be faith congregations, almost half of them in Canada would have no place to meet. And so those have a spiritual aspect to them. Churches and other congregations open their doors to these, and we estimate that that saves hundreds of lives every year. And that's if you count the loss of a life, um, statisticians count that as millions and millions of dollars for every premature death in terms of cost to the system, cost and lost wages, cost to families. So it's in some ways measuring the benefit is measuring the good that they do that prevents harm coming to people, such as addiction.
That's interesting. You also note that much of our healthcare comes from religious organizations. So, can you explain this?
Well, so in Canada, of course, much of the education and healthcare systems came often from the Catholic Church. So the foundations of many of even education and healthcare in Canada, most of it has religious roots. Now, these days, most of the hospitals and schools have, especially hospitals, have become nationalized. But in the background, you have that. But there are significant numbers of private faith-based hospitals, educational institutions, and schools. And one thing I'd say, even though the schools, many of them are Catholic schools or other Christian schools, they still get some tax dollars supporting them. But that whole foundation of education and what they're providing is there because of their faith connection. So you walk into a faith-based school, and immediately you see that this is something different. Kids are going to a church service or a mass, and they're getting different kinds of teaching. So for someone to say, well, it's that's not significant, actually it is a tremendous contribution that religion continues to make to Canadian society.
So, how would you respond to those who would argue that religion causes more problems than it's worth in Canada, especially when we're looking at some of the sex abuse scandals associated with religious leaders? And now, of course, the residential school atrocities are a huge focus, and then violent extremism. So, how do you respond to that?
Well, certainly, religion can be one of the greatest sources of hope and goodness in the world, and it can also be, when misused, one of the greatest sources of hurt and tragedy in the world. So, not to whitewash those problems; those are serious problems. One of the ways that we see in a society like Canada is that religious freedom provides a framework for dealing with times when religion falls short of its ideals or commits crimes, even. So that religious freedom allows sort of, you could say, a competitive marketplace. Again, going back to an economic analogy, that if one church or one denomination or one faith group is guilty of some atrocity, society itself comes in and challenges that. And rather than criminalizing religion, it goes after criminal activities that may have happened within a religion. So I think that in the free market economy, when you include that, to include religious freedom, freedom itself provides those checks and balances for things that, like anything, just like the internet, it's good, but there's also a dark side. So that check and balance that we have in free societies, I think, is one of the greatest assets to deal with the negative side of religion.
Now, you mentioned religious freedoms. So, we've seen more restrictions on those religious freedoms recently in Western nations like the UK and the US, and right here in Canada. Is this currently, or will this at some point impact our economy negatively?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, just to use a current example, many of the immigrants coming into Canada, sort of fueling the next generation of innovation, come from countries where religion is central to their identities. And so, if these folks come into Canada, whether they're Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus or Christians from from the global South or from the Middle East, if they don't feel that they're free to be their whole self, be that authentic self that faith is such an important part of, they're not going to feel like they can buy into the Canadian, project, so to speak. So that religious freedom's important for new immigrants, just as it is for other people in society. So when you feel like your faith, which for many people is a central part of their life, not everyone, but for those that it is, they don't go to work and think I'm just here to make money. They go to work, many for a purpose to glorify God. And so, in that kind of thinking, that if they don't feel that they have religious freedom, that innovative, sort of spirit that says we're gonna work hard and make our country great, it gets diminished.
Right. Now, by the way, is faith on the decline in Canada overall, or is it increasing?
So overall, I mean, the faith has been on the decline in Canada, looking at census data. But faith is resilient in that there was a theory of secularization, that secularization would eventually drive religion out and just be sort of living in a few souls. But that's not really what has happened. So many of the people in Canada who are devoutly faithful continue to be. And one of the sort of secrets is that people who are more religious tend to have more kids, and then they raise more kids. So sort of built into this religious change that's happening is also what's going to happen in the next generations. First, you have the immigration coming in where people are much more religious. Second, immigrants that even aren't religious, like Chinese coming in from mainland China. I think I saw a statistic that half of them become Christians once they come to Canada. So, religion is not something that's just, sort of locked in walls, in a church or, a mosque or a synagogue. It's something's living and active. And so, I expect the religious makeup of Canada to continue to change, grow in different ways in the years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And then what about in the US? Do you see differences between Canada and the US overall, where faith is either on the rise or the decline?
I mean, the U.S., of course, tends to be a bit more religious and actively religious, more public religion in the United States. There's also been a similar decline, and sociologists have different explanations. One that I think makes sense to me is that religion has become very political in the United States. So it becomes a hot button issue. If you're following the news, the U.S. Catholic bishops are, debating whether or not Joe Biden should be allowed to take communion, receive the Eucharist, and that's political. So and Joe Biden's response was, well, for me, my faith is not politics. My faith is, what sustains my soul. So I think that the question of the future of American religion is wrapped up in the degree to which faith can sort of reclaim that soulful ground rather than a political ground. And I think that will have more people interested in faith. But when it becomes political, it becomes divisive, and that doesn't really bode well for the future of religious growth.
Yeah, it just seems like everything these days are becoming so political. It's ridiculous. We don't have very much time left, but really quick, there are occasional arguments that if religious organizations can help restore the family unit, it could greatly reduce addiction problems, depression, gang violence, crime, which would end up saving the government and our economy huge amounts of revenue. So, any thoughts on that, real quick?
Oh yeah. So I mean, what we find is that faith is a characteristic of many stable families. You can have a stable family and they don't have religion at all, but the data overwhelmingly show that where you have a more religiously active and involved family, they tend to have more longevity and a stronger family. When you have families, that's one of the most important resources for people facing addiction and other kinds of problems. Because I mean, we've done a lot of work with studying Alcoholic Anonymous and these other programs, and you can see such a difference between those who are addicted in these programs who have family support versus those who don't. And as they say in AA, you're either you're either institutionalized, dead, or you're following the AA program. That's one of their slogans, and you really see that when people don't have that family support, they tend to either get incarcerated or overdosing as well. So family is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Grimm. We appreciate having you on.
That's great, and glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. Dr. Brian Grimm is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy: How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.